is the schedule of the living history class taught at the Whalebone House. Soapsuds to Sunday School with Louise Rise. How we kept house without running water and electricity in the home. Whalebone House Tour by Louise Rise. The doorway is different in that it is etched glass done by the Posey brothers. They are early day glass makers in Portland, responsible for a lot of the stained glass windows in the churches in the early days. And of course, in this particular era, the lace curtains were the way to treat the windows. We should probably close the door. This shows the wedding pictures of the people who built the house, Mr. and Mrs. Matthews. They were married in Champoeg, and their first home was in Oysterville. And they, according to the historical records in Oregon Historical Society, they came to this area in 1889. And of course, no place to live unless you built your home immediately. So they started the house. It is 10 rooms. And would you please meet Mrs. Russell, Mrs. Ehrlund.
How do you do?
How do you do, Linda?
Nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you.
Mrs. Russell is with the Daughters of the Pioneers, and she has been participating in this living history project. So
lovely.
We
it's a joy to meet you.
Are glad to have her with us. The parlor, of course, in those years was a room kept absolutely apart. You notice that the doors are something that can be closed off, and it was a room used for visiting minister, perhaps on Christmas if you were real careful and sat on your chair and not moved around much, because this was where Mother kept her special treasures. And it was also for funerals in the early days. This was a fact of life, that there were no funeral parlors, and so you cared for your own, and this was another use for the parlor. The high ceilings were typical of the area. The transoms over the doors were for the ventilation in that particular period. A lot of the finishing of the rooms was wallpaper. Would you like to see the bedroom? And we'll
yes.
give you some idea as to what it was like in those years. The little rocking chair was a sewing chair or for nursing baby. You notice that it did not have high arms. It was low to the floor. And of course, all of the lighting was of kerosene, coal oil lamps. This is the day and time before electricity in the home,
right,
or running water.
Right.
So it was an era that today is just about forgotten. But we're glad to be able to have something of this nature to share with folks. The dresser, of course, had brushes, which were very useful because there was no other way of cleaning, only brushing and airing things. And the hat pins were part of your way of dressing. And we can go on to the other part of the house if you'd like. Amazingly enough, they called it the fainting couch. And how it came about, the style of dress in those years was real tight Of course, just really cinched up. And if you were in a warm room and you couldn't breathe anymore, you were going to faint. And so this is where they put you. This particular lamp was found buried on this place and survived. No broken parts except the chimney glass. The pictures on the wall, the top picture is my husband when he was a young man, and the unusual thing about it is that it is not a photograph. It was done in the Orient, and it is an artist's drawing. And so we're real happy to have that with us today. The lower picture is of myself when I was 2 years old. The picture part isn't as important as the frame. My great-grandparents were early day pioneers that came across the plains, took up donation land claim in the Willamette Valley, and we're real happy to be able to have some of the pieces that survived from their collection. Benton County was where they established their home. Would you like to go on upstairs?
Oh, I would love to.
There's 10 rooms and 2 stairwells, this one, and you'll go on to the other one after a bit. It goes down into the kitchen area. And it's real easy to collect pictures of that particular time also that are not available today. We had never lived very far from the Columbia River, and this is an early day scene of Portland in the very early days. The baskets are a collection that a friend gave me. The bedroom to the front of the house, of course, is the airy one.
Yes.
The quilts, this one my grandmother made and gave me my first home, and it was made with used material. They did this. It's sad, but they used everything. Nothing was thrown away. And she did all of the piecing and all of the quilting absolutely by hand.
Mm-hmm. And that's about how old?
Oh, this must have been done about the late 20s.
Uh-huh.
The pieces are so tiny. You just can't imagine. She would say to me, I must get these finished now because I can't see to do this after dark.
Yes, and that's certainly understandable.
Yes.
All those tiny stitches.
This one appears more new, but truly it isn't. The work is new of the quilters helping to put it together, but the applique was done by my mother and has been stored for years, and now finally we have it together so that we can enjoy it. And another part of the lifestyle, of course, no running water in the house, absolutely. If you wanted to freshen up any time of the day, you had the bowl and pitcher, you carried the hot water from the stove up and took care of yourself in the bedroom. There was no provision for bathrooms whatsoever. It was just running water made the difference.
And the linen towels.
Yes.
Lovely.
Yes. That's it seems unusual to wipe your face today with something of this nature because it's not, we think, not near as absorbent as but they had cotton, and which helped a lot. Mm-hmm. They did not have the synthetics.
How about the bed?
This is typical of this era also. The iron bedsteads, as they call them.
Iron and brass.
Yes, a bit of
that's beautiful.
Of brass that would go. The old dressers, of course, were about the only piece of furniture that you had, other than what they called the commode. It was a way of life. The chambers could be found and advertised in the early day catalogs of Sears and Roebuck, and this was the only provision, unless you went outdoors.
That's right.
At that particular time. The house has, of course, we talked about it growing as the family grew. It has a hallway that goes on into the next bedroom. Be careful of a step down here. This is the stairwell into the kitchen, but we have another interesting bedroom to see, where it shows where the ceiling slants.
Oh, yes.
And because they were carpenters, they didn't always do as we would think proper. They did something that would show their work. So they decided on a plate rail in the bedroom. We would probably attribute it to the dining room, but
this is lovely.
And this type of wood finish was very typical of
the tongue and groove. It's beautiful.
Of the time. Trunks were something that they stored clothes in, because clothing was something that maybe you had an everyday dress and a good dress, and when they wore, then you got another one. Not a closet full of clothes today.
That's right.
Where you made a lot of changes. This is an underquilt of my grandmother's, the last one that she made, and it too, I think, must be the same pattern. And all of the stitches are by hand.
Have you used them right along, or just very carefully?
At first I did. Like every young person, you didn't realize their value until they begin to show wear, and then you realize what's really what you had, and so then you put them aside quite a bit. But we'd like to be able to. These are very old chairs. You can see the seats are of the leather.
The lace leather?
Yes.
Oh my, isn't that something?
Yes, they.
And you've had those a long time?
Yes, they go way back.
Beautiful.
The rocking chair is oak and with some leather. This is the type of dresser accessories they had. Buttons, of course. There was no such thing as zippers and all of that sort of thing to fasten clothes. Even gloves had buttons. Shoes had buttons, and so they had. This would be a shoe horn, and then this would be a hook for the buttons. This is a type of ivory that has, and brushes, lots of brushes, because that had to be the way of cleaning. And you aired and brushed and took care of your clothing in that manner, because wash day was one day a week, and
right.
Some material was almost impossible to wash, so you had to be extra careful. These were the little dresser boxes that were for special little pins and maybe a powder puff or something, and with a little mirror that they had. And if you wanted extra light in the room, you had a candle. Either that, or you made sure that you carried up a lamp from the kitchen.
The dresser is lovely.
Well, it has the metal pulls, yes. And another part of the architect, the very wide baseboards. Floors were mopped in that era. They used a mop, a string mop or rag mop, and a pail of water and soap, and really scrubbed. So that this was their way of protecting the wall surface. They had real wide mop boards. Would you like to come on into the dining room and
yes.
see this setting is typical of the that particular period, but we'd like to talk about some of the things that we've collected through the years too. The Yard of Roses was one of my mother's favorite prints. This is my grandparents' marriage certificate that they had at that particular time. They took their pictures and had a lot of the mementos of that era. This is a collection of bright flowers and cards that were a cover on calling cards, the Victorian era.
Yes.
And Grandma and Grandpa lived in Corvallis, and he was a professional photographer, and they had a lot of company. And it was typical of that time, no telephones. You came up in your carriage and came into the entry hall, and if no one was home, you left your calling card. This hung on my grandmother's wall. This is where they kept the newspaper and an occasional magazine. And this is an early day painter of this scene on the Columbia River. And this is another idea that was very typical of hanging on the wall in the homes. The sad irons, as they call them, the first type was the solid handle. And then a little bit later they had the removable handle where you could have several, and one would be heating on the stove, you know, while the others were warming. And an interesting thing about the expression sad iron, the word sad means heavy. Here, of course, we have a collection of the type of dishes and things that they used that time. There are toothpick holders and plates and glasses, sauce dishes. The fluted dishes, I thought, was with
that's beautiful.
Because they used napkin rings, they even used them in souvenirs at the World's Fairs and things. They would. This particular one is the Lewis and Clark Expo.
Well, isn't that interesting?
1905.
Uh-huh.
This is a lot of odds and ends of that particular period too.
And what an ideal place for the sewing machine.
And this, of course, is the old Singer treadle, the small pitchers and jelly dishes, relish dishes that they had at that particular time. Medicines and spices all came in glass containers with either stoppers or corks, and that was part of that particular time too.
The little hanging closet that you have there.
Oh yes, this is for we have the little perfumers here. This one is tatting, which is something you don't see too much of today. A bookmark cross. These are little perfume holders that you would carry in your purse.
Oh, aren't those beautiful?
Yes. The lamp is a family piece. This hung in my grandmother's home in the early gas light days. And this is the book that identifies our history. It tells of our great-grandparents coming across the plains and settling. It was put together at a time when it was hard to collect material because there were no telephones. They must write to the various people who might be interested, who might have knowledge of the early day settlers. And then the print was printed in Chicago, so from the Willamette Valley it had to do a lot of traveling before they could get it all on paper.
The crystal is beautiful on
This of the two was typical of that particular time. They had the decanters and the cordials. And,
Is the vase in the center very old?
yes, it's especially old. It's etched and in gold. It's from a glass works in New Jersey that's no longer in existence.
Oh, that's interesting.
It is recorded in the books on glasswork. The fruit picture, as long as my memory goes back, I can remember that on the wall at home. So.
Well, that's especially meaningful.
Yes,
to you then.
yes. It's faded, but there is a blue velvet was at one time between the glass and the wood frame that sort of set it off. We're
beautiful.
And the old sideboard, of course, was one pieces of dining room furniture that everybody tried to acquire. This is an unusual type of chair. The desk is typical of early English furniture. The inkwells, the sealing wax for sealing letters, and the window casings and the skirting. See how they use the wood under to decorate with.
Yes.
Because wood was no object. They just found new things to do with it. Another one of the sideboards is the blue platter was one from my great-grandmother's home. The fruit dish and the fruit knives were a style for where today we would reach for a hi-ho cracker or something. They had fruit. Mrs. Russell is preparing a stew, and of course the wood range was the absolute essential to the home. It did everything. It heated for warmth, it heated the water, it did the cooking, and it prepared the water for the weekly bath. The kitchenware was, most of it, cast iron. It cooked everything from cornbread to muffins to tea cakes. And the utensils were very simple. A lot of it was wood, the wooden bowls, the wooden spoons that was used. If you wanted to grind the food, it was done by hand with the grinder attached. And the cabinet had tin-lined drawers where you kept the cereals or the flour, that sort of thing. Of course, the majority of it was in barrels in the pantry in another part of the house. The table settings were very simple. If there was an oilcloth, fine. If not, it was the wooden table. A typical description of material for the kitchen was a table and two chairs. Anyone else needing to sit down to the table at that time would have a bench. A lot of times it was perhaps the man or the man of the house was being served his meal and he was on his way to work and mother ate later. An interesting part of the dinnerware was the cup and saucer. The cup without a handle. The saucer very deep. This was the time when they would pour the coffee into the saucer and drink it out of the saucer. These were typical of cereal bowls, egg cups, platters, bone-handled knife, and metal fork, mats, perhaps for hot mats, and of course a lot of milk and cream, so the pitchers were large. And the work was hard. We were constantly having to put wood in the stove in order to keep the fire going, whether it was the middle of the winter or the middle of the summer. If they was doing anything using the stove to heat irons or anything of this nature, it had to go on.
I remember my mother canning when it was in the 90s outside and the fire had to keep going.
That's
Could I take you back to the bin table, Louise, and to ask you about the pail and the dipper?
Oh, yes. This is what they carried the water in the pail, of course. That's the only way that it got into the house. And the dipper was a common cup. This, of course, tells us all about the communicable diseases. Everybody drank out of the same cup.
Yes.
We'll be able to look the whalebones and some of the way that they did the architect.
All here.
Can I help you?
Thank you. It was a joy meeting you, Miss Trent.
Thank you very much for coming. I enjoyed showing you.
It was
Thank you,
lovely.
Miss Ehrlund.
When you make the soap, using a common strainer, and then on into another container. The recipe is for 10 cups of melted fat. You can use, of course, tallow is the choice one, the beef fat. This can be obtained at meat markets, and you can find other recipes, but the 10 cups of melted fat, 5 cups of water, and a can of lye is the ingredients. And now we will show you the process of putting it together. Putting soap together means mixing lye and water in a enameled container. Do not use aluminum or tin. Cast iron was fine. It was used years and years ago. But today this is the way, and it is hot, very hot, up to about 200 degrees. And it must be cooled down to about 90, which is, and don't lean over either. Be careful of destroying the can. You can steam up from this, being dissolved. Always do it away from the house if at all possible, because any splatters from this will burn real deep. Olden times they had vinegar nearby if there was a burn, so that it could neutralize. Years past, people made their own lye, which is wood ashes put into a barrel that has a filtering system, straw in the bottom of the barrel with an opening so that the lye water can drain out, which eventually is lye water. And you put a layer of ashes in the barrel, and you pour some water in. You continue this, but you always keep the barrel covered because rainwater would change the action. And then you test the water as it comes out, and when it floats an egg, then it's ready to be used as lye water. Today we buy it in a can. I think we're getting close now to temperature time to put it together. soon as it's in the bars and out of the box, and it's allowed to dry. And the longer it dries, the harder the soap will become, and the longer it will last. This is going to make brown soap this time. Then you cover it with a cloth and a rug. It goes through a heating process. It's real hot. That will have set enough so that you can cut it. The finishing part of making it now, and it is the right consistency. So we cut it into bars. Wash day was Monday, and it was all day long. And everything was scrubbed on the board, the white clothes first. Like so, all the dirt and soil and everything that was in the clothing, back down into the water, scrubbed again, and then it was you wrung it out, twisted the material until as much of the water as you could possibly get out back into the tub. Then it went into the rinse water. And for the white clothes, there was bluing. That was the form of bleach in white, and in the white clothes. And they were wrung out. And especially in the whites, it would be put in the boiler to boil. And anything especially dirty that of course would help. And the homemade soap is a real good cleanser. And this went on all day. By the time they got the family wash all completed, white clothes first, colored clothes next. And as time went on, this water would become quite soapy. And this depended upon how tired the housewife was, how dirty the clothes were, whether this water got changed or not. Because every bit of water had to be carried into the house, and every bit of water that was carried in had to be carried out. So you were conservative, both in labor and time, workload. And for the white clothes that were of the aprons, of the doilies, all of this sort were starched. Starched could be purchased, but a lot of the housewives' budget didn't allow for luxuries of such sometimes, and so starch was made with flour and water. Finishing the washing was carrying out the water. The process of sprinkling the clean clothes that came from the line, rolling them up, this by hand. It was put back in the clothes basket and covered over. And then when time came to iron, the irons were put on the range to heat. The very earliest flat irons was a complete piece of metal. And to keep the irons clean, because they would be black from the stove, you cleaned them with, when they were warm, you cleaned them with beeswax of them, and then you rubbed them on the paper. You rubbed them on an old cloth until you got it clean enough, and you proceeded to do the ironing. The ironing board was a board pressed between, suspended between two chairs in the very first types of iron that was ironing time that was used. This was, and it was always easy to scorch, and maybe the iron wasn't just exactly clean, and so you had to learn to do this over again if need be. Wasn't an easy process, but you wanted to have the doilies nice and white and all ironed pretty for the tables and the stands, and so this was the way it was done. And they could be put over the back of the chairs. And of course, there's always the darning, the darning egg or bit that goes into the sock. We always have to have it underfoot, and they just do wear out.
I have just a small hoop because I only have a little bit of embroidery to do here.
Oh, that's neat. And I see you have your special embroidery scissors with you today.
Yes, yeah, I think they are attractive, aren't they?
Yes, they're really nice. Basket, if you need more thread, we have some here in the basket. And of course, the first thing to do was to install the churn. No running water in the house, so it was brought to a pan with the tea kettle. Cool down from the pail. Must be especially clean for the butter, because butter absorbs odors, and everything must be especially clean on this. Cream into the jar. Now we will start the churning. And there was, sometimes the cream saved up was sour, and that made good butter too. But sometimes it was sweet cream butter. The idea is to churn at a steady pace, not real fast, not real slow, just steady. The cream is of room temperature. This helps to make the butter come sooner. If the cream is too cold and it's difficult to do. If it's too warm, it's the same process. And we can take a look now and see what it's like. Close. through several waters to get all of the buttermilk and whey, and then it is either made into a round patty to fill the butter dish that we have here, and then there are the 2-pound molds if you plan to save it in the milk house or take it to the market. Sure we get all of it out of the... Now we wash it with cold water. You can see the water is quite milky now, and we will pour it off and put on some fresh. Remember, this day and time, all of the water was carried from the well. The bit that was brought into the house was used and then carried back out again. It takes about 2 or 3 washings to get all of the milk out of the butter before we can mold it and add the salt. Most all of the butter this time was salted. They didn't have the unsalted butter. Salt was a way of preserving. And here we're ready for another washing. The butter dishes for the table were large, round. Butter was not molded at that time. However, if you wanted something individual in the way of a butter mold or dish, they had the little prints that you would press onto the butter and make a design. The early day paddles that you worked the butter with were handmade, a good amount of them. These are 2 examples. This one is a Walton one, and you can see how it is curved so that it works the butter easier. These particular molds are 2-pound molds, and they open, they're hinged, and they're open so that they're able to go together, squeeze out the butter so that you have a nice rectangular cube. And we need to have it run clear, otherwise it will produce rancid butter as time goes by. There was no way for keeping it really, really cold, and so you had to be careful that it was washed completely so the water runs clear before you add the salt and mold it. So we made the round molds of butter for the butter dishes. We have this one for the kitchen, and we have another one for the dining room. Provided everything in the way of heat, heating the water, heating the irons for ironing, doing the cooking, the baking. It just was the central point, absolutely. Building a fire in it, you would take up the lids and put in shavings, small pieces of wood, make sure the damper was open. These were the side dampers. These two needed to be open until the fire got going. Then you would add more pieces of wood from the door. This would be how it was managed. This was the ash tray container in this part of the stove. This is the ash box. And this had to be emptied at least once a week, carried out, and whenever you build the fire, make sure the inside grates were cleaned and let the ash fall down. The oven, you tested it for baking by putting your hand in to see if it was hot or warm, sort of average. You did this by estimating. Also, you would control your fire to look after the oven in the same manner. If you wanted something to brown up right away, you would have a fairly hot fire and then let it gradually go down, and that way it controlled your oven. You wanted to cook something very fast on the range, you had this type of lid. You had a small fry pan you wanted to put directly over the heat. This would be like turning up the electric range on high. And the next size pan or container would be like this. And for a full kettle, you could take the entire lid off and put your kettle directly over the flames, and you would not have to wait any period of time for boiling. The warming oven was where you would put the plates to warm, the bread to raise. Depending on how hot the stove was, you was careful of that. Perhaps you wanted to put things up on top of the oven. The coffee pot was always kept nearby, and newspapers were very scarce in those times. So you would start the fire with shavings, sometimes pitch, cedar. It was always a dry woodshed nearby, so there was no problem there. The type of matches that were used were the wood stick matches. There would be a container nearby to hold the matches, and of course the cleaning of the stove was an absolute constant thing because of the burning the wood. The ashes and the dust was just always around. One of the common things that cleaned the top of the range was cold coffee. And another one would be a burlap sack with ashes. Ashes in itself was your base of lye. This, you had moist ashes and did some scouring, it was like using lye. The bread we have already risen, and so it's probably be fine to put it in the pan. It's already greased.
Oh, well, fine. I'm glad to be able to help you, Cousin Louise, because I know you're having guests for dinner tomorrow night. So, so that's fine. I'm very happy.
Yes,
so.
Thank you. It's quite a chore to get all of this done on a Saturday, but it's baking day.
That's all. Now we'll just put this up here on the warming oven to rise.
Fine.
That should be fine. I got an apple pie here.
Okay.
And a mince pie
already
made.
You you've been busy.
Yes, I have. We had to do that while the bread was rising. And,
This lets the steam, of course, and
I got the cherries all ready to go now, and this pie crust is ready, so we'll put the cherries in here now.
I think they'll keep well and make great pies.
Yes, I think so.
The bushel baskets were a bit heavy to carry, but that was all right. We were so glad to get them. So we're going to be having those for dinner, and I hope the folks don't have to travel too far this time of the year.
Yes,
but,
right.
It'll be nice to have them. Hello, Mrs. Johnson.
Thanks. How nice of you to invite me. I've been looking forward to this.
Well, nice of you to come. And
Thank
would
you.
you like to leave your wrap in the first room there, please?
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I've been looking forward to this. Oh, and the others will be right in.
Thank you. Thank you. Would you like to go to the first room here and leave off your wraps?
Will do. Thank you.
Hello, Mrs. Driscoll.
Oh, Mrs. Rice, thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, you're very welcome. And did you come in all in the one carriage today?
No, my friend and I came in a separate one.
Oh, fine. Well, would you like to leave your wrap off in the, or your bonnet in the first room there, please?
Certainly I will.
Hello, Mrs. Rice.
Hello, Miss Holway. Please come in.
Oh, thank you. So nice of you to have us today.
Well, we're glad that you came. And would you like to leave off a wrap?
Oh, I've had a bit of the room. Maybe I'll keep it. Thank you.
Please be comfortable.
All right.
And have a seat at the couch. The folks came in two carriages. Did you travel far?
Oh, not so far. It goes quickly when you're going to a friend's home.
Well, that's neat.
Well, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to get this dinner on.
Oh, thanks very much, Cousin Marian. Now we will have a chance to catch up on the news. Well, your husband has been doing some special work lately, Mrs. Wilson?
Well, I don't know if you call it special, but he took the wagon out on the beach the other day, and there was a nice big cedar log came in, and he cut that all up into bowls. And then he's home right now making shakes out of the log. He was lucky to get a nice straight one, and he wanted to stay with it before someone else would beat him to it.
That's a special
Wonderful.
Yes.
Did you get your buggy mended yet?
No, we're still waiting for the blacksmith to fix that wheel, and then we hope to go to Ilwaco one of these days and visit some friends down there.
Excuse me, Cousin Louise, the dinner is ready now.
Oh, would you ladies like to come to the dining room now and
Thank you.
Mrs. Johnson, would you please have the chair on this side? And Mrs. Wilson, would you like to sit here?
Thank you.
Mrs. Driscoll, would you like to sit beside Mrs. Wilson? And Miss Holloway at the end, please. Cousin Marian will be with us on near Mrs. Johnson.
How lovely.
And please be seated. Thank you, Cousin Marian.
Are you and Marian related to your maternal or Actually, paternal side?
Oh, our maternal. And so we're get together as often as we can.
That is wonderful.
That you live close?
It's a bit difficult to travel sometimes, but we manage.
out of your garden, Louise. Mrs. Rice.
Yes, they are, right. Yes, she has a lovely garden. Thank you.
Yes, it is.
And
Well, it's
we,
hard to, otherwise.
we have some fresh butter, so it came just in time.
Did you churn?
Yes, I enjoy churning. Please help yourself to the salt. I would think everyone would like to season on their own. So
Just to cut some.
Mrs. Wilson, what would you like?
I'll have the apple, please.
You were saying...
Mrs. Driscoll?
Mince, please, Mrs. Russell.
Mrs. Rice, you were saying you had heard something of the railroad coming?
yes, some of the family had been into Portland, and we understand Mr. Loomis has been able to find some financial backing. It's a pleasant way to travel also.
Did you have much of a stopover at these different places like Altoona and all along the line?
No, it was something we sort of made good connections, so we didn't have to wait too long at the different places. But there's a lot of excitement in Vancouver nowadays with the state of Washington coming into existence now.
Oh, isn't that
Yeah,
wonderful? They're
lots
all
of
over
excitement.
Oregon Territory.
Yeah.
I think this is the Spitzenberg. I didn't keep watch on the several bushels that we had included in our.
It's a shame to peel away that pretty red pin.
Yes.
We had such a nice group of children signed up that are going to be entering school again this year. You know, I've been teaching up there in Oysterville, and so I am just so excited. We have such a nice. I think the community is growing.
Isn't this district number 1?
How many grades do you have in your class?
It was 6.
6 grades. Wow. Okay. There's still the Nelsons.
Oh yes, yes.
And I said, well, if you will promise to do absolutely what your father says, I guess I shouldn't refuse you. So then some of the other Indian men said that she was the only child that had ever been out there. So I gave her that book, Linda's Indian Home. And it has all of the pictures of Salina Falls and the Indian families that lived there at that time. And so we've been very fortunate with our history.